I think there's two plays that contractors should definitely leverage. One of them is this approach that we're taking, like obviously have somebody who handles the entire social media, but hires a media company to do photo, video, but specifically short form, and do a mixture of that sort of stuff. But then the other piece though is kind of similar to what you're doing now, which is the podcast plays, whether it's like, interviewing clients, maybe it's maybe eventually you start talking, you interview one of your employees and you guys can talk about the business and how you guys approach your process. Like, and then eventually create clips from all that you can eventually leverage for social media and begin to deploy it that way.
First, I want to say I've been watching everything that you've been doing on LinkedIn primarily, right? That's where I first saw some of your content on my feed. I think it's very interesting and impressive that out of all the marketing people that I see in and around our space and the marketing companies, I think it's important to recognize that you're the only person and or personal brand that I know of or that has reached me via LinkedIn out of the entire space. So I definitely want to dive into, how you've done that, what the strategy has been and the long-term vision. First, I just want to applaud you on that. But before we do that, I want to just understand kind of how you came from where you came from, which is a similar space as me, right? I started off in going to school for music. I worked in radio. I saw that you started off at Guitar Center, which, by the way, I was one of those guys that used to hang out in Guitar Center and rarely buy anything because I didn't have any money, but I certainly spent a lot of time there. But we both came from a music space. I've seen you discuss creativity and construction, which is something that I believe in and I talk about a lot. But how did you get from being in music to construction like I did?
Yeah, so I kind of have to go a little bit further back to be able to kind of lay up the how I got the story of how I got there. So in a nutshell, I grew up in a family of construction workers. My dad was a construction worker my entire life. Eventually, he had his own small residential commercial painting company. And during the summers, actually in high school, I would go out, be a laborer, kind of help him, around. And the reason I did that was not necessarily because I wanted to, but I remember asking my dad, I'm like, hey, so school, like, high school starting, and I'm curious, when are we going to go school clothes shopping? And he's like, if you want school clothes, you got to go work for it. And I'm like, what? And so eventually he said, well, if you want, you can come work with me during the summer, make some money. And that's exactly what I did for several years in high school to be able to pay for, school clothes. Obviously that sounds super shallow, but that's the truth. And so throughout that process in high school, my dad actually signed me up for a music school. It was kind of mid freshman year, and basically it was like, I'd have regular high school Monday through Friday, and then on Saturday all day from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. I would have music school, and I did that for several years. And then eventually, as I'm doing this, I'm like, man, I like this music stuff. And so I eventually began to explore the idea of going to like a music college of some sort. And so eventually I researched all of them. And the one that obviously caught my eye was Berklee College of Music based out of Boston.
Yeah.
And so I ended up applying and keep in mind at this point, I had like maybe 2.5 years of experience on electric guitar, which is my instrument.
Okay.
So I ended up going there. I was so nervous. It was just it was definitely super nerve wracking. But after doing because you have to audition, like you actually have to play a piece, then they test you on reading music, and then they do an in-depth interview on you to be able to obviously qualify you. And, eventually I got the offer to be able to come to Berklee. And so I decided to go. I'm like, man, this is awesome. Be able to go out. I decided to do that. And then after a year at Berklee, I begin to think, I'm like, my musical heroes didn't go to music school. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
these people that I look up, they didn't go this route to become musicians. They just went wrote music and went to go perform, sold back then CDs or things like that as a means of making money, as well as touring with merch. And so that clicked. And then the other thing clicked is like, I'm like, do I really want to be $125,000 in debt with a music degree? And so as I did that, eventually I'm like, okay, well, no, that's not what I want to do. So I ended up moving back after doing a year at Berklee And then, yeah, started at Guitar Center. And the cool part of that year at Berkeley is like, I honestly wanted to find ways to recreate what I had there. Because I mean, when you think about like, if you've heard of Berkeley, for those of you that don't know, it's one of the top music schools in the world. Tons of people from all over the world come to this specific school. And I had been a part of so many different jam sessions, shows, recordings, all that sort of stuff. It was honestly just the best place to be. But the reality is, when I come back to Washington, yeah, we have like a level of grunge. You know, you have Nirvana, you got Jimi Hendrix, you got you
Yeah.
know, these icons, but it's not like a music state like the same way New York or Nashville, you know, these other places are. And so my thought was, let me recreate that. Let me see if I can make my way in the industry. And eventually started working at Guitar Center, and basically ended up talking and networking with the musicians the same way you said you were just hanging out. These guys would come and play,
Yeah.
hang out, and eventually I got my way into a few different bands. And yeah, eventually began my career within music there, and eventually landed working for a large 10,000 member church as a music director for several years. And so, but outside of that, I was like, you know, playing clubs and shows and different venues and things like that. So music was my entire life. But eventually got married. And when you think about
Real life
marriage,
kicked in.
real life kicked in. I
Yeah.
had to make
Same
money.
here.
Yeah, yeah. So I had to make money. And so eventually, you know, both me and my wife at this point were working at the church, and we decided to pivot and change careers and try to make a living, because, you know, we have aspirations to have kids, a house, all that sort of stuff at that point. And so we did that. And it's funny, I ended up quitting, and we took a month off because we wanted to take like a little sabbatical. So we took a month off. But eventually I'm like, okay, now what? We need to make money. And so the first thing I ended up doing, because like I mentioned before, I started in painting. Like I was painting for my dad, you know, during the summers in high school. And so eventually, what did I do? My dad had an industry connection who had a company, because my dad didn't have his company by this point. And I ended up going to go paint for him for a few months. And I ended up painting like 200 plus condo doors. It was during the summer. So it was definitely busy. But during that time, as I was transitioning from like music into the construction world, my wife knew of this business owner who she had babysat his kids. He was the owner of a commercial painting company. And for some reason, he decided to mentor, kind of help me make the switch from music to business. And yeah, eventually he took me under his wing, and he, you know, I asked him a lot of questions, things like that. He helped a ton. Eventually went to go check out his office, and it was awesome to see a full operation. Like, this is legit business, way more legit than my dad had, because my dad had a small little residential company. So like our backyard was like his warehouse, you know, all that sort of like versus
Yeah.
this is
The
like an
shed.
actual, yeah, the shed. This is a legit
Yeah.
operation. And so eventually, after I finished this condo project, this company that I'm painting for, which is not the company that I have this residential guy that's mentoring, they knew that I wanted to go into marketing, because I basically evaluated. I'm like, I can go into project management, I can go into IT, I can go into finance. There's so many, like, there's options I have as far as choosing what I want to do. And the reason I chose marketing is because it not only is strategic, like it definitely takes business acumen to understand psychology, persuasion, all that sort of stuff. But it's also creativity. It's like, you know, especially as a musician, as a creative, I'm like, it was just the best of both worlds. And so this company eventually, you know, knew, and I wanted to go into marketing. They reached out saying, "Hey, Jonathan, I know you're wrapping up this project for us, but I just want you to know that we're opening up a sales and marketing position that may be of interest to you, if you'd be interested." I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's awesome." So I end up calling my mentor, who's helping me, you know, like I said, coaching me to get into the business world. I actually text him. I said, "Hey, just so you know, like, this company just offered me this role. You know, I'm just curious. Would love your feedback. It seems like the right move. Like, this is exactly the direction I want. This is my foot in the door."
Yeah.
And he responds within a matter of minutes. He says, "Jonathan, I think this is a great idea, but I think you should come and do that for us instead." And so for me, automatically, I'm like, "Whoa! Like, this is a far bigger company." And I'm like, "Man, this is crazy. Like, this is awesome opportunity." And eventually, you know, end up interviewing with not him, because he already knows me, but I interview with their CFO, with their director of business development, who would be my manager. And after that, we square things away, and I start working there within a matter of 2 weeks. And that began my journey into construction marketing. And then from there, you know, came in house, and this is a younger company. By this point, they were like maybe 15 years in business, and they really wanted to grow. The founder was really hungry. He was a young guy. He's like, "This is the way we want to go, is leverage marketing, things like that." and as a competitive advantage, because they're going up against, bigger players as well as people that have been around in the market for a longer time. And so they're like, hey, what's our competitive edge? And so they saw marketing as that. And so I ended up coming in. We ended up building something from the ground up. As it relates to content. So social media was a big part of it, copywriting, website project content, video content, both externally, internally, and even towards the end of my time there, we're in the process of building an actual podcast as well. And so it was definitely more forward thinking as it relates to like creating content and trying to put
Yeah, what
the
year was
content.
this?
This was this was 2018 was when I started
Okay.
there.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so eventually was there. And yeah, and so the reality within construction, and I'm sure you know this really well, being a leader yourself within your company is, with smaller companies, you wear multiple hats. And the same thing is true about marketing. Like, you not only do social media, you do website, you do video, you do photo, you do all these different things. And I realized that social media specifically was the area or the pocket in which I really liked. And so what I ended up at basically during the pandemic, when the pandemic hit, um, projects were closing left and right. And I'm sure you probably remember this, just like because this contractor, at least, they were both private and government. And so projects were just closing down. We didn't know COVID, all that sort of stuff. And so eventually I got furloughed. And luckily it wasn't the first round. I was actually the second round. They were trying to do everything they could to keep as many people as they could, but they're just like, hey, like projects are closing up. So that means fun, like revenue, things like that. And so I totally
Of course.
understood.
Yep.
And so during that time, I began to like think about it with my wife. I'm like, man, like I love this social media side, and this is honestly the area in the pocket in which I really enjoy the most. And I'm like, I wonder if I could do the same thing I did for the contractor I'm working for, but just help more contractors out. And so, after the process of me and my wife talking through the risks and what if it doesn't work, going through all that sort of stuff, eventually we decided, okay, let's make that move. After a month of being furloughed, they called me back saying, "Hey, Jonathan, I want to bring you back." I said, "Actually, I'm not going to be coming back. I'm going to be starting my own business full time." And there was shocked, surprised for sure, because what we were building was honestly, like, it was super promising, and
Yep.
just seeing the impact of that. But I just knew in the back of my mind, knowing I grew up with a dad who had his own business, I'd always wanted my own thing as well. And so decided to do that. And yeah, and from there just began the journey of, now what I do now specifically for customer growth, which is help commercial contractors build their brand online through social media. That's what I've been doing the past few years. If I'm completely 100% honest with you, when I first started, my business strategy is I will pay anybody that for anything that they need. That was my business strategy.
Of
But then
course.
little
Yeah.
by little, I began to focus in.
Yep.
And yeah, now I'm in a position where we're definitely in growth mode. And yeah, so that's just a little bit of background how I got from music into construction. But more specific, I've always been around construction, but I've
Yeah.
kind of made my way back into it again.
No, it's very interesting. We have a lot in common, actually. So during COVID, same thing happened here, right? I run a general contracting firm
Hmm.
in New York, and that resulted in me creating my consulting company, which does primarily estimating for general contractors.
Mm.
And I think that being removed from the office, being at home, right? With ourselves and see and so I think you probably saw the same thing that I did, which is like I am very good at this, and I was able to make an impact for my company doing this, but I have the entire internet that I can leverage to be able to use as a place to make the same impact for all sorts of people around the globe. And by the way, the impact feels good. It's very rewarding.
Yep.
So I created my company in COVID the same exact way that you did, Um, I want to I want to tee off on something that you said earlier about what is our competitive edge, right? The company that hired you to do some pretty forward thinking marketing and social media stuff, they built it based on the question of what is our competitive edge.
Hmm.
I was asked what our unique selling proposition was, and I put a lot of thought into it. And the truth that hit me in the face was I'm not sure we really have one, right?
Mm.
And I've seen you mention this on podcasts as well. When you ask people, general contract, what are you doing differently? And they tell you a bunch of stuff that other contractors are doing, right?
Yeah.
And I looked around at us and I was like, okay, like, what do we do differently? Well, maybe I think we do some things better than other people. I have a combination of softwares that may be a little bit more strategic than other combinations of softwares. I think I'm really good at coming up with processes and procedures and documenting them and implementing them, and having a company that's efficiently ran and a decent amount of automation and all that stuff. But the reality is, we win jobs, we bid jobs, we write subcontracts, we schedule projects, and we try to execute against a plan. That's what everybody's doing on a high level, right? And so I started to really ask myself, like, how do I better answer this question instead of having a non-answer? And what I am left with, which is what I'm using in my sort of beginning of my approach to actually marketing our company and myself, is the only thing that we can really do to differentiate ourselves from anybody else is ourselves. So if I build a company with people who have the same shared values as I do, with the same, tenacity, the same goals, and the same principles, and I humanize us as much as everybody around me is comfortable doing, with me pushing a little bit, I think that that's the way that I'm going to be able to actually answer that question, right? So what I've done is I created this podcast. I've put myself out there. There's risks involved with that. First of all, it's very uncomfortable. There's a lot of vulnerability involved in it. And some people are going to be attracted to me and my company because of my personality. And some people are not going to want to maybe do business with us because of me and my personality and my team and their personalities. But I think it's a gamble that I'm willing to take. And I wanted to kind of talk to you about, what you see around personal branding, because as I led this podcast with, like, you've achieved the ultimate goal, in my opinion, which is you've broke through the noise, and you've reached me. And so what advice do you have for somebody like me who is trying to essentially accomplish the same thing?
Yeah, so there's a lot. I have a lot of thoughts, and we can definitely go down a few of those and answer that question specifically. But before I answer the personal brand question, as it relates to like your competitive edge, your value proposition, all that sort of stuff, the because especially to from an outsider, from somebody who may not have business acumen, you may look at that and be like, hey, what does that mean? And for business people, we understand the business jargon, but the reality is like, hey, what makes you different about if we put you side by side between your competitor, what actually makes you different? For me, as it relates to that, and I know that this isn't the question necessarily that you asked, but so like there's a lot of marketing companies out there, like do marketing for tons of different industries. But then there's also two marketing companies out there that do marketing for construction. And I realize in general, my mindset as it relates to marketing and the way I'm positioning my company is I'm playing a game that nobody else is playing. I'm a market of one. I have no competitors because the reality is like some of these people are my friends. Some of them I've talked to, some of them I've gotten to know, some of them, I've shared insight, about how I'm growing and building my business and vice versa. But the reality is like when I look at any of these companies, whether they're big or small, I'm like I'm playing my own game. Like I'm playing a completely different game. And my goal like is to be able to help contractors build like the phrase I use is build online. And the same way contractors are building buildings, homes, hospitals, schools, the way that the same way that they're doing that, I'm trying to help them do that with their brand online. And if you go on my website, anybody that wants to go check on my website, customergrowth.co, what you'll find in my website is I don't have a services page. Like I don't have an option for you to go look, hey, what services? Because people will typically, hey, what services do you offer and things like that. And sometimes people will get irritated that I don't have my services there. They'll say that. But the reason I do that is super intentional is because I'm not just selling this like service that you look for. Okay, this is what I want. This isn't what I want. No, no. I'm selling an actual strategy and an overall approach that will benefit the business objectives that you have for your company. I'm not a because if you look at any other marketing agency, out there is they typically, hey, here are the services we offer. Just tell us which one you
Yeah.
want. Cool, we'll do it. And I'm like, no, for me, I'm honestly probably positioning my agency more as a consultancy. It's like, I want to understand, what is your pain points? What is it that you're actually looking to solve? And then how do we relate that back to social media? How that can either help you, or maybe there's a whole different strategy. But my goal is to not just be a, oh, you get to pick and choose how you want to engage with. No, like, no, this is a whole process that we actually implement from the get-go, and nobody else is doing this. And I understand that people will say, well, sales are going to fall off, or all these things are, I'm like, that's fine. But for those people that actually take the time and understand what I'm doing, they're like, okay, cool, I want to go through this process. They'll see the value in actually the discovery process, proposal, negotiation, and finally when we start working together doing onboarding and kickoff, like, it's all incredibly strategic and intentional for that reason. So I know this wasn't the question you asked, but
No,
that's one of,
that actually that it is. It's very
um,
applicable.
but but
Absolutely.
but the reality is, like, whether it's a contractor, another business owner out there, you begin to think through the context of, like, how do I play a game that nobody else is playing and build a market of one? Like, nobody, like, you can put, like, there's aspects, yeah. Like, if you look at it, maybe you'll compare me to another social media company, all that sort of stuff. But the reality is, like, when I look at it for myself as a business owner, I'm not playing that game. You guys are playing completely different games, and trying to fight, whether it's on price or all these. I'm like, no, that, and especially when you fight on price, it's a race to the bottom. I'm like, that's not the
Yeah.
game I'm trying to play. Instead, I'm positioning myself in a different light. And so now, to answer your question for, like, the personal branding play, is you'd be surprised how many marketers, whether they're in-house or work at an agency, or even marketing owners, like business owners out there, who do no marketing for themselves. And so automatically, I think right away, I'm like, there's a book called Blue Ocean Strategy. It's basically
Yep.
finding your competitive edge. And for me, I'm like, nobody else is doing this, and this is what I'm trying to sell other contractors to do. What better way to do this than to do my own marketing? And so I began down that whole process, and it's really interesting to see, because some marketing agencies, people are starting to pick up on it and starting to do it, and that's totally fine. And honestly, I want to encourage that, because the reality is, like, I'm not going to help every company in the world, and the same way they likely won't. So there's enough business to go around, out there for everybody. But the reality is, like, for me, I'm always trying to figure out, okay, what's nobody doing. So, like, for me, the first example was creating social media content through LinkedIn. That was level one. Maybe now, more recently, it's like, okay, I'm creating short form video content of myself talking about, marketing and things like that, that may be helpful for contractors, starting a podcast, creating other forms, unique forms of content and things like that. I'm always on the lookout for what's going to position me in a light where, um, people will not only get to know me more, but hopefully over time will actually like me, and then eventually trust me as it relates to me knowing what I'm talking about. Because I would see social media as a means, at least from a business B2B perspective, I would see it as a way to, how do you say it, build relationships at scale. Because as you probably know this really well, construction is incredibly relationship based. Like, you have to go shake hands, make calls, send emails. But the reality is, like, there are a lot of people who are on LinkedIn and on social media all the time. And so my goal is, like, how do I take these one-to-one interactions and instead scale them? And so that's, in a sense, what I've done. But the biggest thing, this all comes back to being a market of one and doing things that nobody else is doing. And if they begin doing it, my goal is, okay, what else can I do? How can I continue to differentiate myself? That way I'm always just literally playing my own game that nobody else is playing.
Right. Essentially, you're just being creative and trying things and seeing what works.
Exactly.
Yeah. One of the difficult things for anybody, I'd say, but I think especially in construction, is there's a huge hesitation to adopt a marketing strategy for a couple of reasons. First, I think through the eyes of a construction business owner, it's like, hey, I'm going to start putting dollars towards something that's not going to give me an ROI,
Mm-hmm.
and we're very ROI driven, right?
Yep.
We deal with numbers and finances all day long.
Totally.
Two, we don't understand much of what you understand at all. You're really hiring somebody who has a completely different skill set than you do. So what I'd like to try to accomplish with you is maybe we can throw around a couple prescriptions real quick, right? So let's say we're talking to an owner of a general contracting company, right? Or you can even use us, for example, right? We've been in business for 40 years. Most of our business comes from reputation.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of our business is going to come from a combination of sales, which is not marketing, advertising, which is not marketing, um, and then marketing, which is such a broad term, which I think, has its cons in itself, right? Right now, most companies are posting pictures on Instagram, um, and I think that's probably like the limit until you reach the companies who are doing more than others, believe it or not, from my perspective. And if you disagree, please feel free to jump in, right? So then it's like, okay, how do we take this to another level? And this is where there's like this roadblock. Because there's so many options and you don't know which route to take and you don't know what's going to be effective and what's going to give you a return.
Yeah.
So what would you say is like, if you had to take a company who was just doing the minimum, what would you advise them to implement in an immediate term to get some sort of a short or midterm result? Let's start there.
Yeah, so the way this like hypothetical situation would need to work is maybe the way we would need to answer it is what's the goal that the business have? Because for example, like I have this term I use called random acts of marketing. Like, and I see contractors do this all the time. It's like, hey, we have website, we have social media, we do these other things, and I ask them, well, why? It's like, well, like we have to have something out there, and I don't disagree with that, but the whole point of marketing and marketing strategy is to relate it back to your business objectives. What is it you're trying to accomplish? And then how does the function of marketing and even sales help make that a reality? So that's where I'd start first. And there are a few options. One of them is, like, and this also differentiates for both commercial, residential contractors as well. One of them could be lead generation. And this may be more on the residential side, but maybe for the commercial side is like, how do we improve business development efforts? Because the reality is like, nobody's going to buy necessarily because of social media posts or because of this or that. Like you have to go build a relationship, but maybe this might help you get your foot in the door because they might be like, oh yeah, I've seen this company, I've seen their content. This is not like a foreign company that I've never heard of. And that just kind of helps you getting your foot in the door. The other
Right.
ones, though, I would say are arguably just as important as talent acquisition. And the labor shortage only continues to grow across the board. And the reality is like candidates, as the amount of candidates both in the field and in the office continue to dwindle down and decrease, they can become way more picky about who they work for. And so in my opinion, I think so marketing, but specifically social media, but marketing as a whole is an amplifier of showcasing who you are. Okay, like what types of projects are you working on? What types of people do you have? Do you celebrate your people? What types of career advancement opportunities? All these sort of things, because the reality is these individuals are figuring out whether they're like, okay, should I take a bet on this company and actually go work for them? Or if they don't have anything to look at, whether it's a website or social media, they're just going to have to go by based on what you say. And the reality is like, if you're trying to bring them on as an employee, there's going to be a level of skepticism because they're like, oh yeah, of course you're going to say these things because you want to persuade me to come work for you. And they could
Sure.
be true or not. And so for me, like that's the second piece. And the last piece I think is just brand awareness, which is mainly the pocket and area in which I land on. And the reason for that is I think if you do brand building or brand awareness really well, you actually get the other benefits of business development, sales, and talent and all of those sort of talent acquisition approach.
Right.
But brand building, basically, it's like there's a certain level of contractors, like the contractors specifically that I work with. They're like, okay, Jonathan, we have enough work as it is. We have the team that we have in place that we want to continue to build and grow. We just want to actually make this a legit operation. Like when people look at us, whether it's employees, potential employees, clients, potential clients, family members, anybody in the industry connections that we have, like we want them to look at our company and be like, oh yeah, that's a legit, and solid operation. And so they want to start building brand recognition and brand awareness. And so then from there, everything else funnels from that. But I think that's the biggest thing any contractor would out there identify is, okay, what are you optimizing for? More the sales, business development standpoint, or the talent acquisition standpoint and recruiting, or the just overall brand awareness building, just trying to get your company out there because you have other things in place. And those aren't necessarily things that you're trying to move the needle for because you already have a process in place or system in place for those things. And then we begin going down that route. And so then from there, obviously you begin going through the specifics around how to actually build that. And so I know you would ask, hey, what would you advise a contractor to do, that's the first thing I would say is like get specific of what are you trying to optimize for. And then
Yeah.
from there, then you begin to make decisions based on that. Is social media going to help you get there? Is a new website going to help you get there? Is a podcast going to help you get there? Is SEO going to help you get? Is paid ads? Is all these like different avenues? Because the reality is like you don't want to just do things, you don't want to do random acts of marketing just to do them. No, like that's a waste of time and money. And I would tell any contractor like don't do it. If you don't know why you're doing this, don't even move a finger. But if you know the actual outcome and how it's related back to your business objective, then you can begin making decisions based on what will help likely get you to the point from point A to point B as fast as possible.
Yeah, I think the ultimate goal is to get business, right? But I think the next layer on top of that, which is where a lot of this lives, is how. There's a lot of why in the how, right? And
No.
I one of my theories is that, and one of the things that I see is, listen, we get invited to bid on projects. All right.
Yep.
Some of those projects are pretty large in value, and there's a lot of money and a lot at stake for the
Yep.
people who are potentially hiring us.
Yep.
And so we engage in emails, maybe a Zoom call or two, and then we give them a proposal. And then we expect people to hire us for I don't know, whatever value, a $10 million or more project without even knowing who they're hiring. And I think there's a trust factor that isn't really discussed enough in this space. And so one of my personal goals is for people to know as much about us as possible so they can make an informed and educated decision on, are these the type of people who I trust to do business with over
Yep.
the span of the next 1 to 3 years, depending on the size and scope of the project. So within that, on its own, that right there, yes. Is it all about getting business? Yeah. At the root of it, I want to get business, and I want to, make these efforts in order to result in getting business. But there's a lot around that. And I think that question is what contractors really need to start asking themselves. And then to your point, right? Like, I asked you for a prescription right after you told me that you don't prescribe things to your customers, because you custom tailor fit your strategy based on your client and their ultimate goals. And I think that's the right way to do this. I think your approach is correct. I think in general in business, customization is the death of scaling, and so it's really not advised against. If anybody else asks me, and which is basically what most people do when they start a consulting company, by the way, is, yeah, no, I could do really anything that you want, and I can kind of customize this for you, and I can do that. I'm like, you're never going to scale this way at
Mhm.
all, and you're not going to even profit off of your customers. This is such a bad approach, and it's pretty much universally agreed upon. I think for what we're talking about doing here, which speaks to the nuance of marketing, I think it really has to be custom tailored, to the company, because what are you marketing? It's not just services. If you really want to be unique in your space and find your blue ocean strategy.
Yeah, and I guess to speak to that, like you do need a level of systematization and like structure in order to scale. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
And in a sense of looking at my business, it is super structured. Like there are parameters. Like when a contractor comes to me saying, "Hey, I want a new website," I'm like, "Hey, I don't do websites, but I know somebody who can," or "Hey, I want to do a podcast," or "Hey, I want to do these different things." I'm like, "I'm not your guy." So like there's definitely like parameters. Like I just don't do anything. And the reality is like even too as it relates to marketing strategy, like I had a well-known underground utilities company reach out to me saying, "Hey," because they know me because they see my content. I connected with their marketing manager, and she's like, "Hey, just curious to see if you know anybody or if you do marketing strategy yourself." I'm like, "I actually don't, but I know somebody who does." And I say that because for me, I stay in my lane. Like I know social media really well. I know it like the ins and outs, both as somebody who manages a lot of accounts for different clients, as well as a practitioner of my own personal brand. And so that all those insights help make me better and help obviously achieve results for my clients a lot better and faster. But the reality is like that doesn't mean that there isn't structure to the customization. So like the strategy is going to look unique to the contractor, but the actual execution is going to look very very similar across the board because it's similar like the same way like if you were to look at like a commercial building like let's say a hospital compared to a school, like, yeah, the mechanics and like the aspect that maybe different subs that you have a part of that project may be different. Maybe the size of scope for specific subs may be different, but you still have the same pre-construction process. You still have the same
Yeah.
construction management process, and you still have the
Yep.
same TCO or closing out process. And so the structure is there. The execution is there. It's just maybe more the specifics as far as how you get from point A to point B. And so I just want to be able to add that, like, there is a level of customization, but the options that clients that I work with, it typically I give them options, not every option, but hey, here are some options that we can explore based on what you're looking to achieve. And the customization really comes down to the strategy, but the execution, the process, it's pretty systematized down to a T.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it's all about the execution. You know, we use the same estimating software and approach with if it's a high end residential new build or a commercial interior renovation.
Yep.
If we're awarded the projects, we use a different form of contract, but we're issuing a contract. I use Procore for everything that we do. Everything is done exactly the same
Yep.
way here, except I'm not going to take the same approach on a high-end residential project as I am a commercial interior renovation.
Yep.
And that's where all the skill can, be set forth and where you can really start to differentiate yourself a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
So I
And for
agree with that
example, to go
100%.
like more specific, that's why I only, like I said, I only do social media marketing, management, the full process. And I only do it for commercial contractors because I understand that residential specific, that's its own animal, like that's its own approach. And I know that there are contractors who are hybrids, which is totally fine. But for me, the overall approach and strategy is very different. And I was on a podcast recently talking about this. It was a residential podcast, and so we try to tailor it towards residential, which totally makes sense. But I just know, having had worked with residential contractors in the past, I'm like, a homeowner and the way they make decisions is very different
Very different.
than a somebody with business acumen. And I'm not saying no homeowners have business acumen, no, but I can't assume all of them do. And so
Yep.
those are the B2B, B2C is a very different approach. And so that's why, even for me, I focus in on commercial construction. Can I help residential? Yeah, but commercial, and specifically more understanding more of the high level business acumen and psychology, is a little bit more interesting to me on a human level.
Yeah. Yeah, because the goals are a little bit more aligned too,
Yeah.
right? People are looking to do business.
Yep.
A lot less emotion in it. Yeah, so I think that makes a lot of sense. One of the things I want to talk to you about is one of the most intimidating things about anything marketing is the requirement to be sustainable in what you do.
Hmm.
Like we've accomplished being able to post content on our social media on a daily basis. No thanks to me, by the way, but thanks to a young somebody who actually started here, and you might find this interesting. So Jessie Gross, so she started here as a laborer. We went on a company fishing trip, and it was the first time I actually got to engage with her on more than a fast-paced business level. And we were talking about what some of her goals were and her interest, and she said, I'm really into marketing and doing stuff on social media. I said, oh, that's awesome, congratulations, I'm going to give you my login to the Instagram account and my Facebook account at the time, and you're going to do this moving forward. And she basically thought I was kidding. I'm like, no, I'm dead serious. Like,
Hmm.
I can't sustain this.
Yeah.
I do a really great job like 20% of the time. So why don't you come into the office tomorrow and let's come up with a game plan and let's start working on this together. And this was like 3 years ago. And she's taken it from what I was doing to, me, getting business from it, essentially.
Yep.
And forget about just getting, I don't mean to overemphasize getting business, right? I have a whole lot of I'm really proud of the work that we do. I like to celebrate the people, and I like to celebrate, the jobs that we're working on and the accomplishments that we have. There's a whole bunch of different sort of goals there. But she was able to do that based on just her level of interest and hunger
Mm.
to achieve this. I've tried to do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. I set calendar, reminders for myself to post images from a specific
Mhm.
project on a certain day and post the updates. And I burn out on that so fast, And so I try that. I'll try to do newsletters. Can't sustain it. I've tried to do written word and intentionally comment on other people and other construction owners in the space and do all sorts of stuff. I can't sustain it. And I see a lot of other people having a hard time sustaining it. And so maybe the answer is that's why you hire people to do it. But is there anything else that I'm kind of not seeing as a blind spot here, or a strategy that you can help people with who want to be able to do this but can't seem to sustain it?
I think so the first thing I'll say, because I've heard this from contractors, is, you know, there's an oversimplification of social media and marketing to the sense of like, okay, it's just to make things look cool or, have something out there. But the reality is, and I'm glad you know this from yourself firsthand, it's a lot of work. And
It really is.
it's like, and if you don't have the right system, if you don't have the right processes, if you don't have the right infrastructure to not only do it consistently, but do it really well, it's going to be quick to burn out or just realize there's a whole bunch of other priorities and things like that. So I think the biggest thing is understanding that the same way you allocate time and money and resources and energy to other aspects of your business, whether it's like your estimating, project management, things like that, or tech even, you also need to do it from a marketing perspective. And so for me, um, having had been an in-house marketer, and now I have my own agency, because the reality is like the thing I want to note from the in-house marketing is I had no marketing degree. I had no prior
Yeah.
marketing experience. But the thing that helped me, and this isn't true for everybody, but it can be, is I think naturally the people that do really well in marketing are those that are willing to put in the extra work outside of the work hours to learn the function of marketing as a whole. So like for example, for me, I'm at, work, and I'm trying to find ways and actually deploy new strategies or find new content mediums, get inspiration, but then I'm also doing the actual work, like creating content, things like that. But outside of work, I was literally listening to every marketing podcast I could. I was watching every single marketing video, take courses here and there. Like I was just trying to learn as much as I could to make sense of all this, because there's a lot of information out there. And sometimes, and this is true for me too, is I notice that a lot of marketers are really good. If they're not good at marketing and they're good at sales, they're really good at BSing. And unfortunately, there's a lot of them out there. And honestly, that gives people like me a bad rep. They're like, oh, you're a marketer. Like there's a sleaziness, aspect. Like, oh, you
Hmm.
just want to take them. Like, unfortunately, that's where I'm having to kind of come back and say, no, like here's the actual value. And luckily I am able to do that every single day when I share free content with contractors on LinkedIn every single day, because I'm trying to build that trust and trying to show, hey, I actually know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But the reality is, like, for me, that the thing that helped me was, one, to be able to have that hunger and desire to actually legit want to learn marketing, and in a sense, like if some people refer to it as YouTube University, and just YouTube it and learn it on my own. And then whatever I learned, go back the next day and be like, hey, we're going to try this out. But then that was part one. But the other part though is be able to have like the right leader. So like this younger leader that was in our leading the company, he was like, hey, whatever it takes, whatever you need from me, I'll make myself accessible. That way we can make this thing grow and build from here. And I think that those two things helped a ton. But the reality is not everybody has, and now knowing I'm a business owner, entrepreneur, so this is always my drive and desire. But the reality is I also know that there are people out there who just want to be told what to do. And so I think for me, in my opinion, if your contractors out there and they want to bring this in house and hire somebody in house, I would hire somebody who, one, either has the experience, has been there, done that, and you can come in and actually build it out for you. Or if maybe you want to take more of a gamble and go with somebody young, maybe an experience, is knowing that somebody that has maybe the entrepreneurial drive or business drive to be able to go out and figure out however they can to be able to make this work. Because the reality is, what you don't want to put yourself in a position is, as a business leader, is to make a hire or promote somebody or have somebody do this that you're still having to manage. And the goal here was to be able to delegate this to somebody else. And the reality is, like, if they're not as motivated or driven enough, you're going to be moving slow, and like, things are going to slip through the cracks, versus somebody who's maybe more hungry and driven is just like, hey, we need to figure out how to make this work. And here's what we got to do, all these sort of things. And in a sense, their ambition helps them get through maybe that period of having to learn. And what would normally take you maybe a year to 2 years is now like 3, 6 months, because they're just that hungry to make it happen. But so those are the options there. But the thing though is, For the contractors that don't want to like do any of that, like, hey, I don't want to hire somebody, I don't want to manage somebody, I don't want to do all these sort of things. I just want to get the from point A to point Z fast. That's where you hire an agency, someone like me who knows the way, has been there, has taken multiple contractors there, continues to do that, and continues to get tons of insights as I'm working, like I said, with both GCs and subs throughout the states. I have so much information and data that's coming into me. I'm like, oh, this works really well. Oh, like I know, like, oh, and I'm getting tons of insight. And so the more and more I work with more clients, the better and better my information and kind of data
Yeah.
that's in my mind becomes for my clients. Because, hey, I know that this, like, we can try this type of content you're saying, but I've seen it not work here for this contractor, this contractor, this contractor. We can still try it and see it. But the reality is, like, what I've seen with this storyline is it's not going to work. Versus, hey, here's actually like a few content pieces that we could potentially build from that I've seen do really well for both my clients as well as other people I see within the industry, that we can definitely tailor and create a unique narrative for your company. So those are kind
Yeah.
of the levels. But the reality is, I think it starts off with, yeah, just figuring out why you want to invest in marketing, and then eventually making the right decisions. Because I know in-house has different costs versus outsourcing and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's some advantages, right, to the marketing space itself is, from my perspective, I know of things that other general contractors do maybe to a degree, but I don't really get to see what
Mm-hmm.
brings a result back to them,
Yep.
But in the world that you live in, Instagram or LinkedIn or
Mm-hmm.
TikTok or whatever's happening at the time that somebody's listening to this podcast, I'm sure you're studying what people are doing, and you can watch the engagement. And if you and I still think you need to understand marketing, but if you have the understanding of marketing and you're looking around, you can look and see like, okay, like that's effective, that's an interesting new idea, and then you can take a piece of that and incorporate it into your own approach and your own strategy, right? Um,
Exactly.
yeah. So that's one of the benefits of marketing being the super saturated thing, right? Like you had mentioned earlier, you know, for anybody to be great, spend all the time that you can in your extracurricular effort and energy trying to learn that. I give that same advice to, project managers who work
Mm-hmm.
for me. There's probably 20 books about construction project management, and there's probably 9 million about marketing, like the word marketing is just thrown out there so easily, and anybody could just say like, I'm a marketing guy. So you do have to navigate through all that somehow. But guess what? The good news is that when you're legit, it's like all I need to do is do what I do and be myself and put it out there, and people will recognize that it's legit, and the numbers and the engagement will speak for itself. So you're working with a bunch of contractors, right? Like, what would you say is your most like? Do you have any strategy that you've implemented for any one of your clients that you're most proud of for any reason, any sort of reason there?
So there's this client I'm working with out of Mississippi, and I do the entire kind of management, social media marketing management process, from strategy, content planning, content creation, reporting, all these specific things like that. I handle the entire program. But one of the things we did with this specific client is we hired a media person. Specifically,
Okay.
we hired somebody who can shoot photo and video on their projects or on their sites. And so it was kind of a mixture of both. So we did some photo stuff, people stuff, but we also started leveraging like employee interviews. But think of like the short form interviews you see like on TikTok or Instagram. Like it's like, hey, like asking a specific question. You have the lapel mic and you ask them a question and get to know them more. So we started doing that, and we do like kind of music video style, because they have like excavators and dozers, all these sort of things, throughout their projects. And so we ended up deploying like this, I like I said, I run the full thing. I hired this specific contractor to come out and take care of the media side. And when we put it together, keep in mind this company's third generation company, been around for some time, had no online really marketing experience or exposure. And once we started creating content from the get-go, it's just like taking off. Like the first video that we posted, and for some this may be a lot, for others it may not, but it got 80 likes on LinkedIn
No, that's a
specifically.
lot for your
Yeah.
first video.
Yeah.
Yep.
So and keep in mind, no followers. So it's like,
Yeah.
and then from there, it's just been building from there. Some posts have more engagement than others, but the reality is like, I think that this is the play. I think there's two plays that contractors should definitely leverage. One of them is this approach that we're taking, like obviously have somebody who handles the entire social media, but hires a media company to do photo, video, but specifically short form, and do a mixture of that sort of stuff. But then the other piece, though, is kind of similar to what you're doing now, which is the podcast plays. Whether it's like interviewing clients, maybe it's maybe eventually you start talking, you interview one of your employees, and you guys can talk about the business and how you guys approach your process, like, and then eventually create clips from all that you can eventually leverage for social media and begin to deploy it that way. But I guess that's somebody that comes to mind because it is an investment for them. Like they are having to invest obviously for my services as well as the services for this media company, but we're starting to see the impact. And so for me, I actually just pitched this to one of my clients, a GC out of Utah yesterday. And it's funny because he follows the media person that I'm working with. And he started getting excited, like, cause he knows what he's capable of doing. And I'm like, man, if we bring this whole strategy together, this thing is incredible. And so my goal down the line is actually to begin to nudge contractors to do one of those two things, whether it's hire somebody to go out job sites, grab employee interviews, even leadership. Like this guy was talking through a project, like one of their a GM was talking through a project specifically, like just to be able to show their expertise and their, like, put a face to the name, put a face to the brand,
Yeah.
either that play or the podcast play. But I just think that that's the way the puck is moving to be able to create the most engaging content. But that's an example of a client that I'm super proud and happy to work with right now.
That's really cool, man. Who is like what's your avatar in terms of like who should be thinking about hiring you or somebody like you, and what do you think that their like realistic goal set should be within that?
Yeah, so right now I'm working with contractors between, like, revenue size is like between like 5 to 100 million a year. And it's interesting because you would think like a contractor that may be like 20, 30, 40, 50 million would have an in-house marketing person, but the reality is contractors are far more concerned with project managers, superintendents, all these other roles, and they will be
Yeah.
marketing, but they see the value in it. And so the reality is, like, whether you're that revenue size, maybe it is like plus like 25 to like maybe 50 plus employees, is a good gauge. But I think the biggest thing though is like it a good avatar, a good client for me is typically somebody who um, sees the value in marketing, is hungry and wants to be able to make it work, but doesn't want to have to go figure it out them for themselves or hire somebody to just figure it out. They're like, hey, I just
Yeah.
want the game plan and I want to work. And that's honestly like it's really cool working with different brands when I onboard a new client regularly now. Is they're always like, when they're done with the whole process, like the first 2-3 weeks of like getting things set up and all that sort of stuff, they're like, man, this is awesome. Like, they're like, you answered every question I had before I would ask it. You have a specific process in place and all sorts of stuff. And that helps because the contractor realizes, like, okay, I'm working with somebody that actually knows what they're doing and knows the way and can show me the way and can lead us forward. And so I think that is typically a contractor that I work well with. And also too, it's somebody you don't want to hire in-house. I'm not against in-house per se, but one of the things I would advise, and maybe down the line, I'm not doing this quite yet, is consulting. It's like, let's say you do hire a marketing coordinator, maybe you do hire somebody who's like a first time in this position, but you want to get them up to the level, like you want to give them the entire playbook. I think that's where consulting comes in place. Eventually down the line, I actually probably will create an actual entire construction social media course, literally sharing it, everything in detail from A to Z. And then let's say someone like you who has somebody in house is like, hey, you just buy this course and it literally lays out the entire framework that you can plug and play to your company, but you don't have to pay my agency or anything like that to manage it. And instead you have the whole playbook. Now you just need to give it to your right person. I'll train them virtually on a course. And now you have a really competent, up to speed individual who knows marketing really well at a level where, for me, I'm working with tons of brands, but instead this person's hyper focused on one and they can do really good work for you. So,
Yeah, go from a do for you to a do with you service or something like that.
exactly.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, but listen, when we first touched base, my ultimate goal was to have my ultimate vision, let's just say, is to have somebody here in full-time capacity doing nothing but capturing, pushing creativity, editing, and distributing content, and being as out of the box and creative and personal as we can possibly be. That's my ultimate goal. But I think, what I saw in getting hundreds of resumes and trying to piece that together, it was more difficult than I thought. And so essentially I'm just going to piece it together and let the pieces come together as they do,
Yep.
And so I started with this podcast, and so far it's going really well.
So let me ask you this, Matt. So, you know, I got on your radar, and obviously you reached out, we connected, and all that sort of stuff. I'm curious, what was your perception of me prior to like consuming a ton of my content, and then what has it evolved into now? Your perception of me, like from the moment maybe we initially connected to all the way up until now, knowing that I have content, knowing that I'm constantly putting stuff out there, all this sort of stuff. I'm just curious from a contractor perspective, because this gives me a lot of insight. Because, for example, not all contractors engage in my content. Even the clients that I have, they don't engage in my content. They see it, they reach out saying, "Hey, I saw your content," but they never like, comment, things like that. So I'm curious, in your position, what was it like before? What has it evolved into?
Um, the perception is that you're just so much further ahead, than like I am, and I'm kind of further ahead than a lot of people who I talk to and I consider colleagues. And so I think that there's a lot to look at in that separation, right? And you would think that it's only a great thing, right? Well, that's awesome. I'm an expert in this space, but not when you're completely intimidated by it.
Mm,
I don't think people like to be so in the dark when they hire somebody to do something for them. I think
yep.
they feel powerless, exposed, and there's a fear that you're going to get taken advantage of.
Yeah.
And I've had, and for me personally, and I know a lot of other people, I've had bad experiences working with marketing companies, right? Like I brought people on who I still think are actually great people with the best intent possible. I went through 8 weeks of filling out forms that are like duplicate forms, and I did all this work, which was exhausting. And then I didn't really get anything out of it. And then it turned into, well, let's start doing, some video. I'm like, well, what about the past 8 weeks of forms that I filled out for you? Like, what are we going to do with that? And I got sucked into a machine. I got sucked into, the thing that you don't have, which is some box that you're going to put everybody through that you think is going to work. And, I had different remote people showing up
Mm-hmm.
on calls, and it was a really bad experience from some what I actually think is an honest person who knows marketing well. So that there's a lot to look at there. And so I see what you're doing. I don't know how to apply it to what I'm doing in a sustainable way. And now I don't say the only difference, but the difference is we had an opportunity to talk. And talking, communicating helps to bridge that gap. So you didn't ask for it, right? But if I want to be helpful in this, right? Like my advice to you is to continue to think about how you can close the gap between you being an expert in a very complicated space, because of a lot of the reasons that we discussed, the oversaturation, the how easy it is to get in and claim you're a marketing person, how difficult it is for me to know if you're actually have chops or if you don't have chops, or if you're just kind of like throwing that word out there, and show the results as much as possible. If somebody like me can see you working with somebody like me, and I understand it, not behind the scenes, but I can understand on the output end exactly what you're doing, and I can understand how it's working and how it's benefiting that person, it's going to be a lot easier for you to hire or get people to hire you, and feel comfortable doing so. I think like everybody, I know we need to be putting more effort towards marketing. It's not like I don't know it. I'm not old school. I'm forward thinking. So the real question is, well, why aren't I? And I'm only doing it in the way that I have control in doing it, which is doing this podcast myself.
Yep.
So how do we bridge that gap? That's the question. That's the question to ask.
Yeah, for
So I
sure.
hope that
No,
was helpful.
no. I think it's always insightful, and that's where I'm saying, like, that's where, to give more insight to you, it's like that's where I'm having to, in a sense, kind of prove my value, show what I'm capable of doing. Because, for example, there are a lot of not great marketing. There's probably less great marketing agencies out there than there are good. And so I understand that, obviously there are contractors out there that have a high level of skepticism. That's why my goal, especially too, when I create content, is I want to create helpful content that's specifically tailored to commercial contractors. So I'll use a lot of verbiage that like commercial contractors will use, like, hey, when you win a project, is you're rewarded the project. So I'll use that type of verbiage to help them understand, hey, I know the world. I was
Yeah.
in-house as well as a means to do that. But then also too, obviously on my website, like there's actual like, contractors that I have worked with, specific posts and, testimonials, things like that to help show that. But at the end of the day, obviously a contractor's main objective is like, hey, how is this going to relate to me, like to my specific company? And
Yeah.
that's always something I'm trying to cross.
100%. And I think the answer is whether it's publicly or it's between you and somebody who's potentially thinking about hiring you. It's, this is what I did with this company. You can see it, and this is what it did for them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really as simple as that, right? And so maybe I think that that becomes maybe part of your social media. Maybe that becomes a segment that you do, behind the scenes of seeing your customers interacting with you without giving away the secret sauce that anybody would be uncomfortable, giving away. I think you can accomplish that without actually giving it away and just showing everybody, like, these are the guys we work with. This is how our relationship is. You can see the camaraderie here. And this is something that we decided to try. And here's how it's helped us together. We can, I can do this for you. Boom, done. And then you can get a start with somebody, because somebody like me is going to call and say, hey, I really liked what you did with that contractor. I'm set up pretty similarly. I'd like to try that with you. Okay, cool. I think that you're a good fit for it as well, right? Let's give it a try. And then boom, you grow a relationship from there.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things for me is like I'll always spotlight a lot of other contractors who are doing really well, but I'll never do my clients specifically, because I don't want it to come across as self-serving or selfish. Like, oh, of course, Jonathan, you're going to say that your clients, create all the best content. But I actually yesterday, and I have more content to create later today for my LinkedIn, I have a specific case study I'm going to be showing on LinkedIn, this full, like, what it looked like for us to be able to build like this contractor that I mentioned to you that is leveraging short form video content, and be able to show, hey, here's where it started. Here's like the whole process we went through, and here's the results now. And I have no doubt that people likely after that post are gonna be like, Jonathan, I want to do that same exact thing. Could you come help us do it?
Yeah. It's not self-serving. It's just being proud of what you do. Honestly, I really don't think it's self-serving. I think it's like, hey, like, look at what we did, and we did it together. So it's really not self-serving. Look at what me and ABC Construction did together. It was a lot of fun. We took a shot. It worked. We're proud of it.
Yep.
And that's it.
Yep. Exactly.
So where can people find you, and how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so the best place to find me is going to be on LinkedIn. Like that's where I spend the most time on. I do post content across the board: Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube Shorts. I post everywhere, but the one that I live on is LinkedIn, and so you can follow me there. I'm posting a lot of fresh content every single day. I respond to my comments. People message me, that I respond to my messages there too. And then also too, if you're interested in potentially having a conversation about your social media marketing for your commercial construction company, go check out my website, customergrowth.co. Obviously, we talked through our entire process, and if you made it this far into the podcast, you already know that my approach for my website is not necessarily to have you look at it as I just want a grocery list. Here's the things I want. No, we try to actually deploy an actual strategic way of leveraging social media as it relates to your business objectives and goals. So that's the overall approach there. You'll see some of my work as well with specific clients, both subs, GCs that I work with, as well as you'll see a lot of content in one of the section with a lot of video content, things like that I'm sharing for free on a consistent basis on how to improve your marketing and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, feel free to check out those two, me on LinkedIn, Jonathan Core, or my website, customergrowth.co.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt.